So we are recording. Then so let me show you here. This is our Pursuit 6.0 web curriculum repo. This is where we develop the curriculum. And here we have, I think we haven't added it to the index yet, which is this README. But here we're gonna have this folder, reassessments, where we're going to be putting in assignments for people that are not proficient in some of those standards, for you to get reassessed on those standards. And this is the first one, basically, responsive website from mockup. Basically, that reassessment is we give you some mockups and you have to recreate them and behave as the mockup behaves, and so on. These are the standards that are associated with that. We didn't have the time to add the descriptions, but if you go here, or if you go on Canvas, you can always find the larger description there. There's also, I can share these standards. There's also this website that was shared with you at the beginning for the Pursuit Core standards. I can share this so that you can find, that will be like full stack web, for instance. Then we hear advanced JavaScript. We have, let's say this one that we're looking at, FSW 3.A. FSW 3.A, know all common HTML elements, HTML tags, and including CSS selectors. Winter, could you help me keeping track of the chat if anything like pops up that needs my attention, please? Thank you very much. I just saw that I heard it and I saw it, but I can't really look at it right now. But here, these are all the standards that you have assessed on. Just so that you can have that in mind. I'm gonna share this right now on online resources. If Zoom lets me click on stuff. Cool. Okay. So then the last thing that I need to do here is open this stuff. I want to try something today that will let me draw stuff so that you can see, and so that we could use it as a somewhat of a so that we use it as somewhat of a whiteboard, or at least for me to explain concepts. So let me see if we can do that. Cool. Can everyone see that drawing that I have in the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, so the idea is that here, I'll be able to draw and stuff. Cool. Okay, let me minimize this. And let's jump right into the lesson. Any initial questions that people might have about what we're doing today or in general?
I have a question.
Yep.
I'm just curious, the length of this lesson will be from now until 1 o'clock, or is it the entire day? Or
Um,
assignments, something?
Good question. It's only half a day. So today, right now to 1 p.m.
Cool. And there's like an assignment to practice afterwards, or this?
That's correct. The assignment is this reassessment. I will say I encourage everyone to do it, even if you don't have to even if you don't have to reassess any of these standards, but do double check that if you have to reassess one of these standards, this is your chance and it's going to be harder to do later on. Also, as just practice on this topic again, very helpful. This is going to.
How do we know if we have to reassess an assignment?
If you go to your gradebook,
Yeah.
that was the Google Sheet that was shared with you, then you will be able to find you'll be able to find it there. You just look at whatever is in red or whatever is in developing or not demonstrated.
Okay.
Well, when was the last time it was assessed? The summer was in September of last year.
Say that again.
When was the last time it was assessed? It looks like mine was in September.
Yeah, I think so. We have been assessing. I think we have assessed this one or some of these standards twice. One when we first saw it, and later on one of the unit assessments where you had to make it responsive. So I think that's probably Unit 4 or Unit 5 assessment, the one that you're talking about. Cool. So share that. Let me go back. Close this. I think this is too big. Let me put this a little bit smaller. And then cool. This is linked on Canvas. I'm gonna share it right now on online resources too. How can I close this? And let's jump right into it. So the objectives for this is to learn how to think about responsiveness in the web and what are some techniques, exact techniques that we can utilize to make our website responsive. Well, we need to know already HTML, grid and flexbox, and CSS on media queries. CSS media queries, you don't need to be a master at those, but you do need to be familiar with them. Now let's talk about why do we want to, why and how it has been historically this done. So let me go back here to my notes. So for some context, 40% of the traffic that you get on websites nowadays are happening through a mobile device, whether that is a phone or a tablet or any other smart device that we all have now. Now, if we keep that number in mind, responsiveness is not just about the aesthetics of your website, but also becomes about accessibility. Thinking that a lot of people in the world are accessing the web through their only smart device they have, which is their phone, basically. So it is in your best interest to make your website responsive so that you can also have, so you can also enable access to your website to the greater population. Yes, you could have a website, you can still see your website in your phone, even if it's not mobile responsive, but the user experience gets worsened, as well as the user having to maybe zoom in to be able to read, and other stuff like that. Plus, it's 2020, and in 2020, all websites are responsive, or most up-to-date websites are responsive. Cool. So we're gonna talk about the problem, media queries, and breakpoints. So what is the problem? The problem is that oftentimes websites are built with a desktop environment in mind. And that is because initially, the only way to access the web was through a desktop computer. When was the iPhone released? 2005, 2006. Up until those points where smart devices starting to come up, all websites were basically only going to be visited in big screens, in desktop or laptops. Now, on top of that, many aspects of the way of the websites are built with the idea of print in mind. We still sort of, in a way, attached to the way content is put on a page, on a physical piece of paper, and that greatly influenced how the web developed. It is only, maybe 2012 to now that we're starting to think about how flexible the web is, and how we're no longer limited by the paper medium, basically. Now, if we think about our website just like a long sheet of paper, like this that we have here that we call website, that all the content that we have is in that page, and we have this sort of frame called a viewport that let us see, give us a window into the website. So let me show you here an example. So let's say we have this. This is our website. Let's say there is content around here. Maybe there's an image. Maybe there's 2 columns here. Maybe there's some more text, and so on. And then we have, let's say, and then we have this window into the website that we call the viewport. Now, the viewport is whatever you only can see, whatever is inside of the viewport at any given point. So let me move this here, and let's say here we have, a big button with some welcome. Let's say that's our home page. And then let's do, oops. This is our viewport, and we are currently looking at the home page of a website. Now, the viewport is that part of site that you can see at any given time. That's what's inside of the viewport. I know that this is sort of an interesting word, viewport. As you start to use that word more, and as you start to also use its relative measures, it becomes a little bit more intuitive as to why it was called a viewport. But you can think of it as just a frame or a window into your website. And when we scroll, basically what we're doing is just moving that window into our website, so that we can see the content. For instance, right here, we can see like the image, or at the beginning of the image, and we can see the, oops. This I'm still getting used to. To how to control this. here we're seeing the beginning of the image and the text. As the user scrolls, maybe all the full image becomes comes into view, and so on. And we have this, the viewport is that part that let us give us a window into your website. So let's go back here. Okay, so building websites for desktop environments generally mean you're operating with a minimum width of about 1,366 pixels. I was doing some research yesterday about like what is the minimum, and this number came up in a few different searches. So at a minimum, you're going to have a width on a desktop screen that is 1,366 pixels. And then that is something that we have to have in mind, because then the content that we show into there will have to be less than that, so that we can show it all. And that there's two options basically. The content inside can be a relative width compared to our viewport width, like 50%, let's say, or it could also be a fixed amount, like exactly 683 pixels. We have the power of deciding what that is, and that's something we have to have in mind. Actually, I would like you to go to whatismyviewport.com. I'm gonna paste this on the chat here. And I want all of you to check what your viewport width is, and maybe share, a few of you just share what you got. Oh, cool. Rihanna got us. Thank you, Rihanna. Yeah, if you could put like, if you could answer in the chat. Okay. So we have a few of you. I think most are over 1,000. Around that number that I shared. There are some of you that have some lower resolutions, like Rihanna has. I'm not sure if you can you see this in my. I guess you can see it on the chat anyway. 983 pixels. That is relatively smaller. Brianna, are you on? I guess you're on your laptop or in a
I'm
desktop.
on my laptop, but the window is shorter. But if I do it max, it's 1440 and 714.
Gotcha. Okay, right. That's something we have to have in mind. I guess I was imagining all of you having it in full screen. I didn't take into account that. But yeah, we can see that most of them are around that that size. And here, like if we, let's say like half of my screen will be 960, which is about where the Brianna had also. At 960, I think our website could still look good, and we're gonna see some examples. I think nothing needs to be rearranged, and it's up to us what we decide a website should look like on with more space, and so on. Oh, also if you add zoom to your website, you see that the width reduces, because now you're sort of at a closer view, and we lose pixels there. That's something that we can keep in mind. Okay. Also, I want us to, let me share this maybe on If you could pull up your phone as well and go to that same website, take a look at the viewport of your phone. I'm gonna share this on Slack so that if you're not, let's see, where should we do this? Let's do it in code share. So that if you have Slack on your phone, you can just click it there. Or you could also just type it. What is my viewport.com? I see Peter. Let me take note of that. 375 by 553. Cool. Yeah, as we can see here. Can you see the window, the Zoom chat window? You can? Okay, because I'm bringing it into view. The lows we have seen is 375. I think nobody has a iPhone 5. Do we have any iPhone 5 users? iPhone 5 or smaller phones have a slightly, like I think there's 320. Now it seems that like 375 is a standard on width. And larger for if it's an iPhone Plus or if it's a Samsung, it's a little bit larger, but it's about, around 500, 375 in that range. Cool. So we're gonna come back to why those are important to keep in mind. Okay. So going back here, at a full width, like on a regular computer screen, you have around 1,366 pixels. And as we were saying, the content, if we want to show it all at once, has to be less than that. It can be a relative measure, like 50%, or we could also set it exactly to be some number of pixels that we want. So let's take a look at this example. Or actually, even before we go there, any questions so far? Okay. Let's take a look at this basic example that we have here. So let's say this is the diagram for a website. It has a navbar at the top. Let's say this area is that green area is actually our viewport, our window into the website. And let's say that first part is the navigation bar and the landing page, basically. Once you go a little bit low, you get the content and you have a sidebar. News websites, for instance, oftentimes have something like this. We're going to look at an example in a little bit. Now, let's think about what happened when we shrink the window by half. If we're in a phone or if we're in a tablet, this is what might happen. We get the navbar shrinked, the content, everything becomes smaller, but then we have this problem of content overflowing. We have the content, if we have like images that are bigger than it could be at this width, those are going to become, those are going to go out of the container. If we have text, for instance, that is too long, that might also go out of the container, and stuff like that. Now, this is not a good user experience. Raise your hand if you have visited a website in the last week that gave you this kind of user experience when you visited on your phone.
Green list.
Yeah, my own website.
Maybe our own website. That's the intention for this review lecture, for us to fix that. But yeah, you see, like they are more and more, or fewer and fewer examples of that kind of experience. Now, when we shrink a website, there are sort of two scenarios, but neither of them are actually great. The first scenario is, we have an example here, spacejam.com. Let me go to spacejam.com here. This is what I get on my full width. Let me put this like here. This looks about an okay size. I can see all the content, the text. The background is a little bit hard to read. This website is 1996, so you can tell it's old. Now, if you visit this on your phone, actually, I want all of you to go spacejam.com in your phones right now, and tell me what you see. Mm-hmm.
I think we're overloading the server.
This website from 1996 maybe can't handle the load.
Yeah.
But Suzette, do you want to share what you saw?
It's just like the whole page fits on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go to different like pages, it just fits on the phone.
What would you say is the user experience like?
That's so
Scrolls inside the text box. I guess for that time you can say it's friendly, right? Because they haven't updated it.
That's correct. I would say so. But this is the best case scenario.
Probably.
This is the best case scenario where basically if we go into our phone, let me see, I think the emulation sometimes here I have found not to be the best. Let me put it in iPhone. This is the best case scenario where basically we get all the content, we don't miss any content, but it is incredibly tiny and we need to like scroll around to be able to see and to be able to read the text. So this is the best scenario where we can just scroll around and all the content is there. The worst scenario is when there's content that you can't access, that you can't see. For that, we have this example, and this is a meme. Right, having to zoom, having to scrolling back and forth. Now, the worst case is where we have something like this. Actually, I do have the link for this one as well. If you go to the lesson, if you have the lesson open, let me share this on also here. Just putting that on code share in the code share channel. This is the website that we're going to be editing. Now, if we look at this in a phone, this is what happens. We have images going out of the screen. We have text hard to read. Let me put this back here. Text hard to read. There's no text overflow, but the descriptions can get a little bit shrunk. Cool. There is this like awkward thing here where the sidebar is like on top, pushing some content, but not some other content at the bottom, etc. Cool. So this is sort of one of the worst case scenarios where we're just missing a lot of content. Or the user, or there is this scrolling where the user can see obviously like broken sides of the website, right? Okay, so in the past, companies were addressing this in the following way. They basically had two websites, one that was mobile and one that was for desktop, basically. And I don't know if you remember, but a lot of apps, like I do know that Tumblr, for instance, or Reddit, did this where if you visited reddit.com on your phone, you will get redirected to m.reddit.com. And the same thing was with Twitter. I double checked like last night. They're no longer doing that, which is great, which means that they have built their websites now so that they only have one website that is fully responsive instead of having two. If you think about that, you know, having to maintain two websites with different like CSS, different JavaScript. There's some JavaScript that can be shared, but different JavaScript, different HTML, different CSS. That's just so much work. Where now the web technologies that we have available, the support in browsers, let us basically have one website that can be scaled down and responsive to a smaller screen. Yeah, imagine, you know, you the developer have to maintain two completely different websites. Imagine if you had to build your personal website for web and another one for your phone, basically. A lot of work, right? Cool. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yep.
How does the browser know how if to redirect you when you go to like one of these pages with your phone?
They can just tell by something called the user agent. When you, I don't know if you have noticed this, but in your servers, when you console log the request headers, there's one header called user agent that basically tells you what the browser the user is using to access your website. And based on that, then they can tell if you're on a phone or if you're on your desktop, basically.
Cool. Cool.
If you inspect the network tab and inspect one of the requests and inspect the headers of one of the requests, you're going to see it there. Of course, we can't really do that on our phones. I haven't figured out a way in which I could inspect my own website in the phone. But I do know it's possible with like connecting your phone and stuff. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, so let's talk about the more modern ways to solve this problem. So media queries, actually, can somebody tell me what they know about media queries? And share for the entire class.
The excuse me. the media queries are limiters that I guess check to see if you're between a certain predetermined width or height, and then make adjustments to the CSS based on those settings.
Okay, that's a fair description. However, that is a description of just one part of media queries. Media queries are more broad. That is indeed the number one use case for media queries, at least for us to establish some width ranges in which we want to change our CSS so that our website looks and maybe even behaves differently. What do you think is called like media query? Like what's a query? We have seen that word in other contexts. Who wants to jump in?
I guess it checks which type of media you're using. So it could be the computer, the screen, that's a different media, and the phone's different media.
That's correct, right? There are different media in which we can see our website. In fact, I want to show you, let me go here, media queries. Let's see, MDN using media queries. I think this is also linked in our lesson. So basically, you have made SQL queries. Oops. You have made SQL queries, right? When you make a SQL query, you're getting information back, right? You're getting some result about users, if you're selecting all the users or whatever. Sort of similar in a way, like you're querying the media, as Vanil said, that your website is being rendered on. And there are a few. So for instance, screen, this is the most common one. When we do media and we say screen, that's like a media query that is going to check if the website is being seen on a screen. Then it's going to apply this thing. And then we can say, if that screen is a certain height and width, then let's do something differently, right? You could also check if your website is being shown in print. And this is what that means is basically when you hit Command P, or when you try to print a page. Let's try to print this one. You see, like, for instance, this website has some media queries, so that, I don't know if you can see that, so that when I try to print this page, you see there is not so much space on the sides. Also, you see, for instance, this background, bluish background, that's gone as well. So right now here, when I hit Command P, the browser, and this website has some CSS that is applying only when you're going to print it. That is good for, maybe we want to hide like borders in your website when you want to print your website and stuff like that. Then there is speech. That is when your website is being like read out loud by a speech synthesizer, basically. Maybe like when somebody is using a screen reader, you wanna, maybe you don't wanna have all the extra divs that you have for that look gorgeous, but they don't actually add any meaning to the website from the perspective of somebody that's looking at it on a screen reader, basically, and so on. There were some others that are no longer with us. TV, projection, handheld, these were deprecated and they're going away. But so going back, media query is about checking what medium our website is being accessed through, right? That can be this is sort of like the default, right? If you don't add any media query for print, screen, or speech, it's just going to be shown as it is. Screen for when it's only on a screen, print when it's going to be printed, speech when your website is being accessed through a screen reader, mainly by visually impaired people, and it's super important. For instance, here I liked, I forgot the name, was it Holden? I don't remember the name of the website that had all tags on all the images, all attributes. This is really important. Shutter, thank you. Cool. So then media query, let's query the media in which or the medium in which our website is being rendered. Now actually let's keep going here. Now when you query a medium, they have different features, right? So for instance, and there is a ton, we're not gonna get through all of them. Let's see. Aspect ratio, color index, grid height, hover. Yeah, I guess from here, there's many features in the medium that we only use basically two, which is width and height mostly, in which we can look at what the width of the viewport is. But you can see, you can see some other stuff. Like for instance, this one scripting. This one is interesting. It says the text weather scripting JavaScript is available. An example of this will be, what if you have like a fancy animation on your website, and somebody is looking at your website in a browser or where they have the disabled JavaScript. Then your fancy animation is not going to work. Maybe then you can detect that and use not as a not so fancy animation or effect, but in just CSS only, so that it's not as just plain maybe. This is interesting pointer. Maybe you can even tell whether the user is using a trackpad or a primary input mechanism, course, limited accuracy, primary input mechanism, pointing device. Huh, this is interesting. Maybe if you want to allow somebody to draw, if they have a pen or a tablet, they can type in. The others are a little bit more contrived. I don't have a lot of experience myself with them. Oh, for instance, orientation. This one is interesting. Orientation is, you can query whether the user is looking at your website on a portrait or landscape mode. Yeah, this something like this. Media, orientation landscape, orientation portrait, for instance. Note here that they don't have a specific media they're looking at. This could be media screen, and then it only applies to the screen when the screen is in orientation landscape. So if they don't have that here, then it applies to all. It will apply to print, speech, screen, and so on. I guess we can't really test this one because I'm on. Actually, let's take a look. Let's take a quick look at this. Have our phone, and let's try to swap it here, see if that does anything. I think it doesn't do anything just because like I'm looking at this on my Chrome, and the simulation, this simulation kind of is not very reliable. Always just look at your website on your own phone. Cool. So, but from here, what we're going to use are mostly height. Let's take a look at height and width. Actually, mainly width. We can also look at the height. So the width is a feature specified as length. Value represented the viewport width. It is a range feature, meaning that you can also use the prefix min width and max width. So min width and max width are part of the width attribute. So you can use any of the variants to query minimum and maximum values respectively. And there are some examples here. Media with 360. Note that here is that when the viewport is exactly 360 pixels, I want to paint that red. Let's see if this applies here. It's responsive. When it's 360 exactly, so I'm going to put it here 360 exactly.
Alejo, you're muted. I am not a teacher. Ha ha ha.
So what we're saying is that we are rarely going to use width only, because that means that that style will only apply at exactly 360 pixels. And if it's more than that, or if it's less than that, it's not going to apply. Generally, we use min width or max width. This is a little bit confusing. I was trying to make a table that we're going to talk about after, about what, yeah, I guess min width means a minimum width. When the website is at a minimum width of 365, then apply this. When it's at a maximum width, apply this other style. I think that's still a little bit confusing. I try to create a table here that is going to help us with that. Let's get back here. Cool. So here, basically, looking at this media query, we're querying for the screen, and we want to make sure we need to use this logical connector here. There is and, or, and not. This is the most commonly used. We're saying if the website is being seen on a screen and that screen is less than or equal to 500 pixels, then let's make that with 100%. Oh wait, I think we have a mistake here where that I didn't catch. We should have a selector underneath here, saying, like, let's say the div. What is the thing that we want to make a smaller width? Is it? Let me take a look. You know what? Let me fix this right now, so that shouldn't take that long. Pursuit core web, cd HTML CSS, responsive. Here, let's say, here, what we need to do here is, oops, still it's kind of slow. I guess nothing. So here, what we need to have here is, say, let's say the container is the something with that class container is what we want to make this with. Let me go. Oops. Say fix media query. I think it's pushed, but it's not pushed to master yet. I'll make sure to merge that. But here, we need to use something like what I showed here. Something like this, where we have the media query, and we say inside of the media query, which is open, which starts here with this curly bracket and it closes here. We can use just regular CSS selectors. Like here, we're selecting this by the class container, and our style sort of become nested inside of the media query, like this. We want the container to become for the width to become 100%, and so on. Let me close this. Okay, so we kind of broke it down. Media is required. This is like what tells the CSS engine in your browser that you are about to make a media query. Screen tells the browser to only apply it if the website is being seen on a screen. Max width this is one of the features that we can target. And there are lots of them, as I showed you here. Note that these are deprecated. These were previous ones, device width. They're going to be removed. We just use height and width. So there are a lot of them. Let me close this. And what this means is, max width means is when the screen width is below or equal to 500 pixels. So this is something that I struggle with, like max width. I don't know if that's greater than or equal to, so I tried to come up with this table where you could think about max width as, if CSS was JavaScript, you will think of it as less than or equal to, and an example is max width 375 pixels. This is when the screen is 375 pixels or less. So this is why I was confused about at the beginning, sort of the mental model. I didn't have a good mental model for that, like max, but also being that meaning less than or equal to. Min width is the opposite, greater than or equal to. So min width 576 pixels means when the website is at least 575 pixels or greater than that, basically. And then width is the one we talked. If CSS was JavaScript, that would be like the triple equal sign is exactly equal to. But we rarely, I've never used this myself, for instance. I never want to apply one style when it's exactly a given width. Any questions up until this point?
I have a syntax question. What does the and mean?
The and?
Yeah.
This one here.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that is, it has still sort of the same meaning of, like, when you do, is, let's say in a program, is it raining, and do I need to, can I exercise, right? Or do I need to go out? So it's still that same meaning like that we have in JavaScript. Let's take a look at here, because I don't remember exactly, and I want to give you a more formal definition. So we have them here. This is the using media queries, and the end. This is linked in our lesson. Let me show you that link here. MDN using media queries. Let me share this right here so you have them.
So when you're writing a media query, it has to be the media and then the parameter so that the and word connects the two?
That's correct. That is correct. Yes. It's not always necessary. If you just want to apply some styling when there's in a screen and you don't care about the width or the height of that screen, you could just do media screen. You could think of, like, by default, as we were seeing here, you could think of that by default, we are instead of media query that starts media all. So it applies to all of them. But it's just that we don't have to write that because that's the default. But as you're saying, yes, it connects. That's a really good word. Connecting the two things. The AND operator is used to combine multiple media queries together into a single media query, requiring each chain feature to return true in order for the query to be true. It is also used for joining media queries with media types. And we can see that there's not, for instance, only, and let's see, or look at this, for instance, if you want some style to apply to a screen and also print, I wonder if multiple devices rules to media queries target both screen and print device. I wonder if you could do it like screen and print, and I think so. We'll need to, that'll require some experimentation. Yes, Douglas.
I may be a handful of steps ahead, but the so I would assume we would need to use both min width and max width to target things like tablets, where it's like a like a screen size that's between a browser and a phone.
I see. That's not wrong. But we can actually deal with only max width or only min widths. We're gonna talk about an approach that one of the CSS frameworks goes with in a second.
Gotcha. One last quick question. Is it better form to split your media queries into a separate CSS file, since it seems like you'll be rebuilding practically your entire CSS specifically for a phone, as it were, and
yeah,
keeping that separate?
I don't have a specific recommendation. I think that does sound good for organization purposes. I think a better approach will be to keep the CSS. Let's say you have a component that is like the flipping card that we created. So we have a component called card. I'll keep all the CSS, including any media queries that might be applying to that, on card.css file, rather than having everything like combined. Like here, the example that we're gonna do is like, it's not as big. We're gonna have all the media queries at the bottom, but I will recommend, like, once we're doing like more React, well, which you are all doing already, just having a CSS per component that needs to be styled. There is a downside to that, like, or not a downside, but like you have to sort of find your own balance. Because like if I'm styling just a tiny button, but I have a button component that is tiny and is gorgeous and doesn't use maybe that much CSS, I wouldn't create a button CSS. Maybe I'll put that style in with the styling of the parent component, for instance. I think there's no right or wrong. It's about finding organization for yourself, and what feels right for yourself, for you, basically. Cool. Going back to the connectors, there are some other examples here. Let's say when we're on a screen, and that is this greater than or equal to, let me look at the table. I mean, with greater than or equal to, that's correct. When the width is greater than or equal to 30 EM, and the orientation of that screen is in landscape mode, then we want to apply some style. Cool. Okay, any other questions, thoughts? Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, so we're gonna look at some examples. Let's look at the Washington Post. Actually, I want you to go to the Washington Post. It can be in your laptops and also in your phone. And I want you to resize the width of this website and take note of the changes that you see. Let's take like 5 minutes for that. try to take note of what resolution, like the content changes. You can open the inspection tools and see see at what resolutions things change. Okay, anyone wants to share some of their findings?
There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. I had found that at 768 roughly width on my browser, it would go to its mobile responsive site. And at roughly 992, it would bring in like it would do like another change. So it would that was the break between sort of like the standard browser site and I guess maybe like a tablet version.
Okay. Cool. Any other observations that you might have noticed? Anyone else?
I mean, I'll add a few more on it. I thought it was interesting too that as you're sort of playing between 1062 and upwards, there's an in the news menu bar below the page break. So there's a or not a page break, but like the header. That as you shrink and grow the width of it, it will add on, depending on I guess the width of the text, it will remove the last maybe 2 or 3 items on in the news, so it remains viewable.
You mean you're talking about this area here?
Exactly. So just below that heavy dark line. So as you shrink it a little bit more, like you'll lose opening day, and then Olympics, and then Zion Williamson.
Got it. Cool. Yeah. Any other observation from any other participants? Thank you, Douglas.
It takes the device's theme, dark mode, light mode.
Washington Post. Let's do that. That's where am I? Washington Post. I think I need to put this. Can you still hear me there well? Okay. Let's just put the mic a little bit more away so that I can look at the tablet here. So it's let's call that theme responsive or yeah, my handwriting is bad, and then the tablet is even worse.
What browser are you
Say that again, Dante?
browser he's using?
I cannot really hear what you said. You need to unmute and then give it a few seconds.
Nah, I said what browser was Vanille using?
Oh, I guess that's a question for Vanille.
I was on my phone. Washington Post. I have dark mode set up across device. I was using
the Samsung.
I was using yeah.
Okay, that's why I wasn't having those. I wasn't getting those results. So.
Got it. Sergio, you had something.
Oh. Yes. I realized that the items of the navbar start to disappear when you when you make it, but it's like like even like moving the screen a little bit shorter, like making the width a little bit smaller, makes like one item of the navbar disappear, and as you keep going, the items keep disappearing until when they all disappear, the Washington Post logo shows up.
Okay.
Something else about the navbar.
Yeah.
When you open it up, it pushes the rest of the site out of Viewport, and the part that's open up in the navbar is like static. It doesn't shrink or move or anything like that, but the rest of the site is still like reacting and being like pushed off screen.
Wait, say that again?
Like the rest of the website gets pushed to the side when you open the navbar. So like a portion of it is always outside of the viewport width. And then the navbar kind of seems static and not affected by resizing. like when you open it up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's kind of cool.
Okay. So let's take a look at. So we saw a few things change. Nav items disappear. Let's take a look then here. So we see that also, like, if I'm on a super wide screen, this is how I would see it. Like, it's empty space on these two sides, right? Now this website, like, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, like websites being heavily influenced by print, just because, you know, that's sort of the first use for websites, to just distribute information the way that you distribute information in print. And that's even more evident with a newspaper, because they are print by default, right? And we can see this website, it sort of resembles the front page of a newspaper. There are columns, and, you know, you could basically, if this was printed, the only way you will know that is not the actual thing is because you have, for instance, like a play button. You know that, you know, you won't have that on in print, for instance, and you have some links, stuff. Oh, I noticed that this website reloads every now and then. I don't know if you noticed, but it just reloaded without me clicking on anything. That kind of makes sense, you know, having a website that that is having updates, especially now with the coronavirus. Every now and then they refresh it so that you have the most up-to-date information. I don't know if it's set timeout. It might be, but that is something interesting. Cool. So let's get this back. Now we can think of this website design as this drawing that I have here, on the right side, on the left side. We have the nav bar at the top. We have a sidebar here. We have some content here. This content seems to be also further divided into two sections. Like, let's say this section here, that seems to have sort of like two sides. This side, the left side, wider, and the right side a little bit narrower. And here that sort of flips on this other side, where we have on the left side we have the narrower column, and on the right side we have a wider column. And then that is, you know, further subdivided into like this section here, this other section, and these two other columns. But we basically have something like this, if we think about it, right? And then there is some other content below. Cool. So let's take a look. Oh, and then so in the sidebar we have this view. Let's take note of what we see here. We have the video, sort of like a video playlist and stuff. Most read, today's paper, market watch. By the way, so let's then start resizing this a little bit. So the first thing that we note is that the page is always center. The margins that the page has alongside here are reducing, but the page seems to be keeping center margins just reducing. There is some stuff around here that I just noticed. I don't know if you can notice the slightly change, but let's not focus on that one since that one is not as interesting. Now around here, then content starting to shrink. We still have sort of like, now we have sort of a constant margin here. Let's take a look, see if that's actually a margin. Put this here. plugging my laptop is about to die. As we keep going, then note for instance this text here, how is getting more and more lines. So this is 3 lines now. I think it's gonna get to 4, just because we're shrinking the width of that container, and that makes the text to break, pushing everything a little bit down. So let's take a look. So this right now we're at 1,211. Let me keep going. Okay, for instance, around here we see that, well, this is not necessarily a media query. Like the fact that then this text became 4 lines. That is just, again, we're making the content narrower. The text, the font size hasn't changed or anything like that. The text will break when it doesn't fit anymore, pushing everything a little bit down as much as needed to fit all the content. But here we still have that. We still have those 3 columns. I need to keep. Cool. So we still have those 3 that are like the main area on the right, the sidebar on the side. Let's keep going. Actually, now around here, what I want to do is actually bring this here, pull this up. Pull this up, and then let's make this 1,211. This is where we were. Now here, you notice that you can do the arrows up and down to lower it. And if you hit shift, then you go up and down by 10 units. So I'm gonna keep lowering this. We are 1,000. We still have those sort of the same layout. Content keeps pushing down because text is having less horizontal space. Then that makes the page a little bit longer. Okay, so around here we see some changes. I think this is some of what Douglas reported. He said at around 912, 992, there is some change, maybe for a tablet. So let's take a look at here. Exactly this is on 992. I don't know if you guys can see that number. Once I go to 991, this sidebar goes away. Sidebar goes away. We don't know where it went yet, and then we are left with the other content. So basically, what happened here is we have something like this. Our page. Navbar is still there. Now this orange section became all this space basically, and here we said we have something like this, and here we have something like this. And actually this is a little bit longer, so let me erase this here. And so on, some other stuff here. Cool. And then this orange layout that we have here, this orange layout that we have still kept. It was made wider, right? We still have those this part here at the top wider, on the right skinnier, skinny on the left side, wider on the right side. When we can say that this orange section ends up around here. We see this actually this exact divider here. So it's like the guide to the pandemic is the last section there. Now, where did this section of the videos go? Anyone wants to say where did that go?
And they go below.
He went below. How far below? It's not around here. The first section was video, top most stories. I remember there was something about the market watch. Video, there we go. We got video here. Let's see, market watch is there, by the way. So we can then see here that if we go back here to our diagram, let's see. Let me erase this here. So this finish around here. There is some other content here. And somewhere here at the bottom, oops. Somewhere here, all the way here at the bottom, we ended up having our video, our sidebar that is actually quite long. I'm just drawing theirs like that. Cool. Okay. Questions so far about what we have seen up until now?
How do we code this out?
We're gonna get into that in just a moment. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that this is for the content that there are multiple media queries for one size, like, or can you fit them all into like one section of like 726 or something like that?
I don't think I understand the question.
Like a media query for the width of 767 or whatever it was. Would that have multiple different sections of media query, or would you just stick everything you want to do in that one media query?
You stick everything that you want to do in that media query, or anything that you want to do at that width or below or above, depending on whether you're using mix and max. You will stick in that media query instead of having to create another one for other sections. Now, if we go back to my initial advice about having the CSS file accompany the component file, the JavaScript file, then in that case you will do you will need those media queries like separate media queries, even though they're the same, let's say the same max width, because then the CSS will live in separate files. Yeah, but you want to try to, if it's styling that is applying a given width, you want to put there, as much CSS as you need to fit everything, or rearrange your website in the way that you want it, instead of creating another media query for technically the same thing. Okay, so then we found that that was like this could be like the tablet mode. I think I went on here. Let's take a look. So this is a tablet that I have. This is the Viewport, 1024 by 648. If we go to Washington Post, let's go. this is what I see because I have it in landscape mode, right? Let's put this on portrait mode. We see basically around, let's see the viewport in portrait mode. We see that I have 768 width. So that's below the 900 that we were talking initially about. And here I have basically just the two, that main section with its two column divide. Okay. Now let's take a look. Let's keep going here. I think I forgot which one I can go by hundreds. Yeah, with command I can go by hundreds. If I hit up arrow and down arrow, I can go by the hundreds. We can see that 791 still that layout, but at some point, let's see, here seems to be 60. At this point, 667, everything just becomes one column, basically. There is no longer this layout that we had here. That was that was sort of the main section. Let's call this the main section that had these separate two columns. Now that became one column. And our website became something more like this. See, we have some changes happening in the navbar. Let's not worry about those for now. Have our main section, and everything just became its own thing, and so on. There is no longer two columns. Let's see if there is some columns somewhere else for content that fits that. And so on. Let's take a look. I think there is something that we didn't notice here, which is when we have the video, let's see. Like this section also changed. We have the opinions, which seems to be a grid of like 2 by 3, right? When we go smaller, we keep that grid, but when we go to one column, actually, that just becomes one column basically, and just multiple rows, and so on. Then from here, then they do their mobile layout, I guess. So we find that, let's see the initial projection that we have, 768. Yeah, 768. Below that, above that, we still have the two columns. Below, we have just one column. I wanted to take a look here, see if I could actually see the media query kicking in on any of the elements. Body, let's take a look at maybe what this main section is called. Seems that my computer is struggling with the with the load. There's something called a root. Then they have sections. There's the main content section. There's this div. Let's take a look. There's no media query being applied here. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Yeah, I think my computer is really struggling with trying to inspect this at the moment. So let's just not do that. Let's keep going here. So we found out how the layout was changing. I said this. From that sidebar going to the bottom, the opinions changing to the columns and just one vertical part. There are some other websites that you can visit to take a look at how they respond. This is good to go in and check some of those, especially because you can see how they rearrange their content, and basically you can rearrange your content, or you can learn about maybe where is the best place to put something once you have a smaller screen. Okay. Now let's talk about how to have that website then respond to at a certain width. And for that, we are going to use media queries with something that people call breakpoints. I don't think CSS breakpoints. I don't think there is actually. No, I guess yeah. How to specify typical device breakpoints. Where you can look at there are some like guidelines that you could use, like for instance these media queries about like for small devices that are 600 pixels or down, for larger ones, then for like medium ones, and then for large desktops. You could use, if you are not sure about what those should be for your use case, you could always look for some guidance about those. So this is like one that W3 Schools has. Let's go back here. I think we're gonna need that anymore. Cool. So breakpoints are just predefined pixel widths that we can set through media queries to have our website change at those points. Most sites have like 3 or 4 ranges, sort of, like phone, small devices, medium, tablets, and desktop. Most have 4. I think I wouldn't say you have to have 4. It's about, I think it depends a lot on the content you're presenting, and you looking at that concept, that website in different screens, see what they look like, and then accommodating to that. Now, Bootstrap 4 uses this. These are like their breakpoints, basically. It's important to note that since Bootstrap is developed to be mobile first, note that all their media queries start with mean width. Remember that mean width is greater than or equal to. So basically, they write all their style. When they start, they write all the styles in the way that it will look like when it's on a phone, and then from there they start scaling out. Like so, basically here they're applying styles that are for when the screen is greater than or equal to 576. When the screen is greater than or equal to 768, then they add some other styles in that maybe add some margin on the sides so that content is in the center, or that makes stuff wider because you have now more space. So you can think of, like, we could speculate that here they start with like small, and then as they are growing, as the screen width is growing, they apply the increment. They go like from small to big. That's one approach. The other approach can be big to small, where basically you do everything with max width. You start thinking about when it's less than or equal to this, I wanted that to do X thing, and so on. I think this is fairly common. Let's see. We can see that this one actually has sort of a mix. It has max width. Oh, it has max width, and then everything is mean width. So this is also sort of incremental, adding stuff. because, for instance, what that means is styles that we have here in this media query at 668 pixels will be added to those that we had here, and they will be combined. If it's the same like CSS property, then those will get overridden, and so on. So okay, so let's jump into this. Before we jump into try to do this, any questions?
I've got a super quick one.
Mm-hmm.
Should we then take the point of putting everything within a media query, pushing forward, versus leaving, for lack of a better term, naked CSS in our CSS file, to that I assume is just going to the maximum?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's right or wrong there either. I would say, you know, leave what you call naked CSS, anything that you want to keep at all times, no matter what the window width is. And then anything that needs to change in media queries, just add those, or anything that needs to change up specific breakpoints, then just add those as in your media query. And then you can basically take one of two approaches, which is like the one that we see here, that they start small, and then they just keep adding style, overriding other styles as the screen gets bigger. I found myself that I use more max width. All my default style is basically for the desktop, and then I go narrowing down with max width later on. Like that's, for instance, what I use for my website, my personal website. I think it's about exploring and seeing what approach works best for you. Yeah, but keep style outside of media query when you want that style to apply at all times, no matter what, basically. Like it's stuff like your background. You want always your background to be the same color no matter what. Then you wouldn't do that in a media query. Okay, so now let's get hands-on. I guess. Actually, I guess I'm going to do the coding. You're going to be looking at my screen, and you're going to be asking questions. So a bunch of you shut down your cameras. It's impossible for me to know if you're engaged if you have your cameras on, if you have your cameras off. So please stay here. I'm looking at your faces, and I would like to know if you're there. Maybe if I want to ask a question of one of you exactly. Thank you for those that enabled it. Okay. So let's keep going in here, making these responses. Actually, even before we do that, let's take a 5-minute break. Even in virtual, we need to take breaks. I'm gonna go grab some water, maybe a little bit of stretching. I'll say don't go away. Just maybe mute your mic and turn off your video but make sure that we're back here. Please don't go away, because then I have to admit you back and it's a pain in the ass. Okay. I hope you got a chance to grab water and stretch a little bit. I certainly did. Cool. So making it responsive. Let's go. So we have this starter code that we put up here. Let me see. Oops, what was this? Oh, I think I had made a few changes. Let me see if I push that. I didn't push that. I'm gonna share this on these. Let me share these on the same code share. So you can clone that. This is the code we're going to use to address this problem. I would say, rather than trying to follow, unless you have two screens, just pay attention and ask questions to what we're doing. Unless you have additional real estate on your screen, this might be harder to look at the screen and as well as trying to code along. Cool. Okay, let's go. I have this code already here, so I'm gonna open this with code.
Alejo?
Yes.
That link gives me a 404. Is that just me?
Can somebody else confirm from the class? Giving 404. Oh.
I got a 404 too.
This is a new thing, internal. I haven't seen this. It seems that the settings is okay. So I think we do have something then here. I think I had made a fork in our repo. I forgot the name. Website responsiveness. Yes, this is the same code. I'm going to share this. Cool. I think, let me know that that one doesn't work. That one should work. It's exactly the same code. Okay. So we are here. Let me know if that's enough zoom. I think I'm gonna put that here. Basically, let's see, we have an HTML file and a CSS file. Let's take a look at the HTML briefly. Oh, we had this, I didn't realize we were importing some CSS as well here. Let's take a look at this. I didn't write this code. Let's take a look at this. Oh, this seems to be just a reset, basically. I think I'm going to remove that. I don't think we need a reset for this. It shouldn't affect us much. Then let's open this up. I think to open it up, a recommended way is, well, I think we could just drag it from here onto here, and it will open up. But I think if I make a change here, I add a p tag, I'll have to come here and refresh there. So we don't have this problem when we're on React because React has the Webpack server reloads on changes. Just to get around that, I'm going to open this with the extension called Live Server. I think one of you showed me that. You don't need to install it. It's kind of cool when you're modifying static files and you wanted them to reload. It's called Live Server. If you go on your extensions, you can install it there. has this icon, live server. Now, if I go to my files, then, ooh, what happened? Did I close it? Oh, I accidentally closed VS Code, apparently. If I'm here, then if I have that extension enabled, I could do right-click open with live server. This is similar to sort of React. It launches a new tab, and when I make a change, it's going to reload for me. Seems to be taking some time because my VS Code is still booting. There we see it's like it runs on this port, and we have there. Now if I make a change, oh, that should reload and I see the change there. Cool. Now let's take a look at here. So we have a body and we have a div that we call container. That div is housing a nav bar, declared with nav, has some nav bar items. So that is this thing we see here at the top. Then there is this main area. This main area seems to be all the content, and then we have a footer at the bottom. That footer is this here. Cool. The footer is just a URL with some li items. That's not very interesting. Let's take a look at the main. Main, we have a content. Let's see, do we have something else? Let's collapse this. Oh, okay, we have a content and a sidebar, basically two things we have in main. This goes back to what we had here. Basically, we have our nav bar here, our content, and our sidebar, right? So that main, or I guess that main is an area that is covering all these two elements. Content, just some headers, p tags, element, images, and that just seems to repeat. Sidebar, similar thing. Let's take a quick look at the sidebar. Some headers, divs that house an image as well as a p tag. Cool. Now classes that we want to remember is sidebar and probably just container. Container, navbar, content. Okay, cool. So let's see. This website is deployed. That's the link that I sent you earlier, which is this one here. This one I deployed it because I want us to look in our phones as well. This is that website, the exact same one. Oh, I see something that the CSS reset did. You see this margin here, this space that we have? That space is not in the original one. That is, I think CSS reset too. We still implement that. Cool. Let me drop this here. And so this is the live version. This is the code that we have. Now let's take, well, the CSS, I think the CSS that shouldn't need a lot of explaining. I want to apply that. I want to remove the margin, so I'm going to say margin 0. That just gets rid of those margins. I want my HTML and my body to always be font size 14 pixels and have margins all around of 0. Body is the one that has those margins by default. Cool, so those are some changes there. Let me close this here. Let's take a look. We saw that when we resize this, content just gets pushed down because the text that no longer fits. And then here we have this ugliness where there's part of the image that's being cut off, as well as this image is going out of its containers, and us being able to see sort of like the back of our website. And on top of that, we get this horizontal scroll, which is a bug that I currently have on my personal website as well. So what we want to do is, so there's two approaches we could go with. One is start with small media queries, going like mobile first, or going the opposite. And now a third approach is you can just look for your personal website or your personal project, whatever, at what points does it break, and what do we want to do in those points. So for instance, let's say here, it kind of breaks once there is no space for this image, right? Once there is no space for this image, then we want to do something, because we don't want part of that image to go below. So that's something we could do. Let me see what we have in the lesson. What's this? Okay, so just like in JavaScript, there is a ton of ways to do this in CSS. We're going to look at it without grid first, and then an approach with grid. So something we can do is, if we have this, if we look at, actually, let's look at this town. Let's look at how we put this sidebar as a sidebar to the right. The way in which we put that is, if we look at our style and we look at our content, we see that the content has a width of 70%. What that means is the content will be 70% wide of its container. The container of the content is the container. The container is by default 100% of the available space. Let's take a look at it here. Put this. Yeah, a little bit of zoom here. We have our content. The container is the parent, we could say, of the navbar, of the main, and the content of the sidebar. Oh, now we see that the parent of content is actually main. So content, we're saying, be 70% of the width of its parent, which is main. Cool. So we do that, and then on the sidebar, what we did is we said, okay, we want the sidebar to be 30% of that width, and we have then that being applied there. So basically, we just made one shorter. Now, what we could do then? What happens if? Let's see. What happens if we remove this? What happens if we? Okay, here's a question. What happens if I remove the width 70% on the content? What is going to happen? Kathy, what do you think? Kathy, do you hear me? Okay, Kathy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, cool. What do you think is going to happen if we remove the width 70% on the content div? What do you think?
Would it like
Yep.
taking more space.
It will make it take more space. How much space? That's correct, but how much space do you think?
100%.
Yeah, basically. Let's take a look here. If I deselect the width there, then that content becomes 100%. Now, why does it become 100%? Anyone remembers? Or why does it why is it pushing the other stuff down? Douglas.
I think it's because it's if it's flex width, it will always inhabit the entire width of the viewport.
Nope, we're not dealing with flex here. I think Suzette.
Is it because of the display and the fact that it's blocked? Someone is blocked, that it takes up the whole view.
Bingo. Did everyone hear that? That is key. It's because it's the display property of a div element is block. If we look at this is something that really helped me dealing with CSS. Just so pay attention in case you haven't looked at this. You click on an element and then you go down here. Sometimes it appears here. Sometimes it appears as a separate tab. This is all the styles that are applying, even the ones that the browser is applying internally. So if I go here, the element that I have selected is my content div, and I type display. We see that it says display inline block. Display inline block. I was expecting that to say just block. I guess in here.
It's assigned.
Say that again, Sergio.
Assigned through CSS because of the class name.
Yep. Yeah. I see it here. Let's take a look at this. I think this is good. I'm taking out display inline block. And I'm leaving the width of 70%. So what happens here is our content is 70%. You can see it. You see the blue box? That is 70%. Now you see that orange on the other side? On this side, that is a margin. That is an automatic margin that the browser is creating, so that the element will push everything below. That's because block level elements like these paragraphs, etc., are block elements, and they create a line break after themselves. So the next content will flow to the bottom, basically. Now we can see that even though the width is 70%, and we have here at the bottom we have our sidebar. But we want our sidebar to flow next to our content, right? For that to happen, we need to make our content no longer be a block element. Again, because the block element will take all the entire width and make a break line at the end. We need to make that an inline block. So once we make that an inline block, let's take this out. Note that the sidebar also is inline block. If we take that one out, then still the same thing, because yes, now there is space. See, we now have this space here, but this one is still a block. Sidebar is still block. It's not short enough for it to go there. Even though we have the sidebar have 30% of the width, it's still a block. Block by default makes it take the entire width. It can't flow up. So if we make then this element also an inline block, then we have that. Now that one fits right there where we have it. And then we have the 30 and 70% as we wanted. Now going back here, the content, if we remove this width, display inline block. Let's take a look at width here. Border width 6. Our width is 819. Right. If we think about it, an inline block element will be as big as it needs to be. Like it will be as wide as it needs to be to fit all the content. Here, that property doesn't seem to be applying, or like if I deselect, doesn't change anything major. But here the content will try to be 100% of the width. When I remove that restraint on the 70%, I think I'm missing something here. Let me take a quick look at the CSS book. Inline block 259. So we see that like an inline box, for instance, it says, this is a box that an element such as strong or span generates. So inline elements are generally spans or strong elements. I think images are also inline. These boxes do not generate line breaks before or after themselves. Any element can be made to generate an inline box by declaring display inline. And then we have inline block box, the inline block, which is what we have. This is a box that is like a block box internally, but acts like an inline block externally. It acts similar to, but not quite the same as, a replaced element, like an image. Imagine picking up a div and sticking it into a line of text as if it were an inline image, and then you've got the idea. So I think then that was the key piece that I was missing. An inline block box acts internally as a block element, but externally as an inline. So that's when that then explains why we have this when we remove the display inline block and we make it a block. We also let's remove the width. We remove the display inline block. Why the element is occupying all the available space. Internally, a block, a block box will be 100% wide, right? So we said internally it behaves as a block box. Internally it behaves, internally a block box. Externally an inline box element. Right now here we have it as a block element. It will occupy the entire available width. Okay, now let's go back to CSS. So a media query that we can write then is, let me refresh this. Simplest one, let's do add media. As always, let's do screen. And we want, okay, we didn't talk about at what point do we want it to break. I think the one that we picked in the lesson is 700 pixels. Again, you could go with a set numbers, or you could just resize and see where it breaks and then go from there. Let's do when is less than or equal to 700 pixels. I'm going to do max width equal 700 pixels. I think instead of equal is colon. And 700. When this is that less than or equal to 700 pixels, what I want to do is I want to remove the width of the content, and maybe also I want to remove the. So I want to remove the width of the content so that it occupies the entire thing. The sidebar comes down, and I want to make the sidebar also no longer 30%. Let's see if we want it inline block. We could think about that. So let's do that. So here, say, let's make the content. Again, remember this is sort of nested. We say width, let's say 100%. I think we could also set width to onset. Onset will literally onset the previous set width. So both of these will work here. So let's say that. Let me go to my actual one. This is the live version. And then let's take a look here. Maybe enable this. Let's make this bigger. Let's see if at 700 pixels or less, then that goes down. Cool. So we see it going down. Also, you will see the styles applying in the media query here. So if I go down here, you can see that at 710, we have the sidebar. 700, we no longer have it. Now let's take a look. If I inspect like the content, we can see the media query applying here. It says media screen ad. As I increase, that goes away. As you see there, as I come back, it comes into view. I want to show you that this also works. The width onset, those will give us the same results. Just by default, a block level element will be 100% wide. So we can just unset the previous set width or just set it manually to 100%. Let's go with the 100%. Questions up until this point?
I've got a super quick one.
Mm-hmm.
When you were pulling the inline block off of the main content set, why did everything remain left justified instead of center justifying to the 100% width?
I don't think I have like a strong answer for that. That seems to be just the default. If you want to center something, then you can make the margin left and right automatic, like auto, and it's going to be center. Cool. So we got that, but then the sidebar here. What is this? The sidebar here still looks like a sidebar. Maybe we want, just like we saw in the Washington Post, to be a grid with some columns and occupy the 100%. So let's do that same thing for the sidebar. So I'm just going to go here to the code and say, let's copy this. Sidebar with 100%. As we see, then we got this. The sidebar is 100%, but you know these images are not, they're not long enough, or they're not short enough to go to the next one. Let's figure out why they're not like flowing next to the other one. So if we go to the sidebar, we see that, oh, the images are wrapped by a sidebar card. And then that has the image and the text caption. So here we have the sidebar cars. What do I need to make? What do I need to do to have the other class cars flow next to each other? Let's see. Joy. What do we need to do to make these cars flow like here? This one go there, this one go here. So
you can flex the sidebar div, flex it, make it a flex row.
That's correct. Anything that that's the next thing we're gonna see, the one with flex. What about without flex? What was the thing that we just saw, that we just talked about, the display property?
You can make it an inline block.
Make it an inline block. Let's make these sidecars inline blocks. Let's see what happens. Oh, we can see that they have block by default. I think we defined that in our CSS. Let's try inline block. We see that they flow next to each other. Inline. Inline here doesn't seem to, the width seems to be like the height 14 pixels. I'm not sure exactly why. Inline block. Make them inline block. But then there's two squished together, right? So maybe we want to have some margins. So let's say margin top and bottom. Top and bottom seems good. So let's set 0 for top and bottom. Let's say maybe 10 pixels for the sides. Okay, that's a little bit better. But then we have this problem where here it looks nice. We have 4 columns, 4, oops. I mean 2 columns, 2 rows. But then this is kind of weird. When there's one left hanging like that. Let me take a look again back what we have here. So we made those 100%. We set those to display inline block. We set some margins. I set top to be 0, to the sides to be 10 pixels. Oh, okay. Let's take a look at this. We have this. We did made the sidebar with 100%. Let's try this text align. Let's see. Let's try this one. Text align we could use to center anything that is an inline element. So that's why when you do, like, when you have a div and you have an image inside and you say text align center on the container of that image, then the image becomes center. That's because an image is an inline element by default. So if we do text align here, center, and our boxes are inline elements, we get this. We get text align. Let me put this in mute. Let's take a look at what happened here. Oh, I forgot to say that the sidebar card is going to be sidebar card. Is going to display inline block. And then we have this. Similar to what we had before, it's a little bit awkward that there's always that image hanging alone. And imagine if this was like dynamic. Imagine if we don't know how many cards we're gonna get. We might get 4, we might get 9, and so on. We will need to plan for that. Now let's take a look here what we want to do. Yeah, this is basically what I was saying. Designing with this in mind is important. You know, an approach we could go with is, where am I? Here. I also forgot to add the margins that I had added in the browser, but I never saved them. So let's say margin 0 and 10 pixels on the side. Cool. If you know that the images are like a fixed size, then what we could do is when they don't fit anymore, make it a column, make it like a grid. Oh no, this is also a nice thing about the text align. Where is no side? So the sidebar. Text align center, because like if we don't have that, this is what we have. The will be justify left by default. So this goes back to Douglas's question. By default, everything is just justify left. So that keeps it there. I guess this does look a little bit weird. That one left. We'll need to keep that in mind. Questions up until this point about what we have seen?
Is this me? Is there a little bit of space on the right? A little bit. Is that like margin or something?
This space here?
Yeah, it's like more space on the right than there is on the left. Yeah, there seems to be like a padding, or maybe it's just not fully open.
There is something. I'm not sure if it's because of like in this mode. There is no space here. There's no space here. No, I think it's just because I'm like in the responsiveness simulation.
Oh,
here
so I guess you
no
was
space.
scrolled a little bit too far to the left or something.
But you see, yeah, I'm not sure. But you see, like you can tell if there's space if the page doesn't go back. But right now, my page is going back.
Okay. Yeah, it's mostly when the bottom. Yeah, it looks better now. Okay, actually.
Cool. Okay, so this is like an approach for responsiveness without using any of the modern stuff. You don't need to like, if it's a simple case, it is very convenient, flex and grid, but you may not need those if it's something like this. Let's take a look at how those do make this easier. Because what we can have is basically a grid that has two columns. One is 70%, the other one is 30%. And when we go to a smaller screen, we just throw away the grid and everything goes back. Or the sidebar goes below. So let's take a look at that. Let me put this here to the side. I'm going to just comment this out. We're still going to need this media query part. So I'm going to take this. And now, what if instead of this starting with 30%? I'm going to actually comment this out. As we have their block elements, they're going to take all the available space. Now we have the content. Let's take a look at the parent of the content and the sidebar. I think the parent of those is actually the main element. Let's take a look back here. I think, wait, let me see. Let's take a look here. Main, actually it's the content. The content div. No, the main is the main element is the parent of the content and the sidebar. So let's then make that by default here. Let's make it a grid. So let's say main display grid. how do I make a grid with two columns where one is 70% and the other one is 30%? Jonathan.
Grid column template. I mean, grid template columns.
Template columns, and then what here?
70% and 30%.
30%. Let's take a look at that. Cool. We have basically what we had before. That now this problem is the same. We make this tiny. Got that. Cool. So then what we can do here is, let's say, just undo that change when it's a smaller screen. So let's do main. Can say display block or on set by default. That goes back down, and so on. We could also say, maybe we want to display a grid. We still want it to be a grid, but we can also say, I want a grid of only one column. So we can say grid template columns, and I can say auto. That gives us the same result. This is setting automatic. How many columns do you want to create? We want automatic columns, or actually, I think not automatic. None is better. We want no columns at all when we are at that width. Now there is a difference between this and display block. Let's take a look. Block. With respect to the child elements. Note here what happens. We have the sidebar. The sidebar has a white background. We see it occupying the entire space. If I remove the grid template and I leave the display block, that sidebar will only occupy that space. Actually, this is, let me see if we can find out. Why is it occupying only that space? If it's display block, it should take everything. Let's make this big.
I think maybe because it's inline block.
Because it's inline block. I think that's correct. So this is the sidebar. The sidebar has no specific. Oh, it is inline block. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, because the sidebar is inline block, so we could remove that as well if we wanted to. It's all about playing and experimenting. We can see that then if we want this to be back to its original, we could just set it the inline block, unset that. So let's do, you know what, let's just keep with the template because the template already sort of does that for us, where the sidebar will occupy all the available space. And then this one doesn't have any effect. This is the hard thing about CSS, is that there are all these rules interacting with each other, and it's easy to get lost in them. Cool. Now we have the sidebar. Let's see, our sidecars are not inline blocks. That's why they're creating that. Let's say we want them now that to be a grid, I think. This is what we did. Now we remove the width on the content of the sidebar. We made the columns to be none. And so on. We could do, oh, I guess we could keep this one for the sidecar.
Is there a difference between grid template column none and grid template column one fraction?
They will be exactly the same. They produce the exact same output, because one fraction you're just telling it, just have one column, and one fraction relative unit be one fraction of all the available space. That of course will be all the available space. Yeah, so that's another. We could do one fraction here for just one column. Let's see. We have this here. Wait, is this the one we have? Oh, I commented this out. And we get back here. Let's put that also again like center. So we get that back. We could also set, there's a few ways. One is we could also set this as a grid itself. Let's take a look at that one quickly. Let's say instead of having this, we just make the sidebar a grid itself. What do you think will be the output if I make the grid, the sidebar a grid itself? Is everything going to look great, or are we going to have to fix something? Display grid, and let's say we want the grid to be a grid of 2 columns. One fraction, one fraction. So we get this. And then here, yeah, it is a grid of 2 columns, just that the title is also one element in the grid. And then everything comes out. Also, the footer is also an element in the grid. And so on. For this, we could say, okay, I want the title to occupy the first 2 cells of the 2 columns. Then everything comes down and will be a little bit better. For now, here we're just going to run with the styling that we had before. Just take this back. Okay, any questions up until this point about the grid? Cool. Let's see, what else do we want to say here? Let's say at bigger widths, we actually want our site to have margin on the sides, right? It's just sort of like the same way that the Washington Post has margin on the sides. So what we can do there is we have, what is our main div, something we call the container. We could also use the body. Let's use the container. Let's say the container set here. Say the container, we want to set, let's say at a max, the container should be, I'm just gonna take my, let's say max width, and maximum point. Let's have our container be, I don't know, let's try 1,000 pixels. So what that ends up doing is it makes it look like this, right? And we have this space here, but our container will never be greater than 1,000. That's this max width. If we make it smaller, then that still works. But what we actually want is to have it center. So here, going back to, we can do margin, 0 at the top and bottom, auto on the sides. We got this here. Now we have that space that if I'm looking at it on a page, then it looks like this. We have all that empty space on the sides. But as I get closer, or as I get below 1,000, then everything will start to shrink. And so on. Oh, this is interesting. Is that a bug on our code or a bug on CSS or on this simulation thing?
It's probably the size of the image expanding.
Oh, great catch. Yes, it is indeed. The size of the image overflowing its container, pushing everything out. Let's take care of that. So our images, they seem to be, they stay at a constant size. I think we can control that in a few different ways. Let's do. I'm trying to think about what the best approach will be here. Let's see, at 400 pixels. Right, if we see here, the image starts to push around 400 just because we have some pattern margin here on the side. Then we're closer to that width. The image just keeps pushing everything out, and we have the background, this container here. Let's see if that's something. That we have set our container to be 100 pixels. So what if we set this to 100%? That gives us no effect. Okay, so what we need to do here actually is make the size of the image be relative to the size of the container is in. So what we can do is let's set the image. Here's the code. Let's set the image. I think we don't have any styling for the image here. Oh, we do have something here. Display block. Oh, we have a display block and margin auto. That's what makes it. That was what makes it center and create breakpoints. If we remove this, let's see. Oh, yeah. I guess if we remove that, it just becomes inline. This text doesn't flow up just because this text is in a p tag, which is a blocked element. So there's a few ways to center images and stuff in CSS. One is this: you make it a display block, you put it margin auto, that makes it now centers it. Also, text align will also work here. If we had set text align and center in the content. I think what I want to do is let's set the width of the image to be 100% of its container. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So we have that. Then our images are that big, 100% of the available space. Let's take a look at what that looked like before here. The image, by default, the image will be its original size. In this case, is 400 by 30 by 300. When we say width 100%, is going to enlarge it or is going to shrink it, depending on the size of the container. The cool thing is that when you set only one of the properties of an image, the width or the height, then the aspect ratio is kept. If we set both, then the aspect ratio distorts and we get an ugly image. Now, let's see if our problem is fixed. Our image is scaling down. And we have this thing. Let's take a look in the phone. 5, we have it better. And I think then that would be it. It could be 100%. Let's say you want an image a little bit bigger or smaller, actually. Let's try 70%, and so on. the size of the image depending on the size of this container, so it never goes out. Let's take this to our CSS. Okay, the last thing that we're going to see is just relative units on the font size and how those are helpful. This is in the image, 7%. Any questions before we move on to that next part? Okay. Let's say that here, actually, let's do this. I'm going to push this code. Don't mind my Git shortcuts. Just because I can't think right now. And then let me push this to the deployed version. Yeah. So now, if you go on your phone, I could also show you here. We should be able to see that version. Sometimes it takes a little bit. Maybe it won't take too long and we're going to not be able to see it. Yeah, seems that it's taking too long. We're not gonna be able to see it, but it will should look like this, what we have here. I wanted to just check if the font size is too big so we could change it. I think if you look at the Washington Post on a phone, they do reduce the font size, and that's what we're gonna do in the next 7 minutes. They do reduce, like this font size is definitely smaller than what we have here. This one. So let's do that next. Let's say going back to our code and going back to this here. Oh, I think we're not gonna have time to get into this, but this is actually quite simple. If you want to hide stuff, like for instance, when the navbar in the Washington Post, we see that some elements are disappearing. This is a way in which you can do that. Like you create a class hidden mobile, and you set media query to be at a certain point. This is missing the screen part here. And then you just set that display none. What you will do is display none so that it doesn't display anymore. But you also don't want to sort of lose it. Like you want to maybe something that was hidden, like the hamburger menu, now becomes visible, and then there's another link that will take you to the same place there. So you hide your items from the navbar, but at the same time, under the hood, you're showing the hamburger menu or some drop down where with another button with the same functionality is now displayed. Basically, that's how that is accomplished. EMs and REMs, this is a relative font size. I think the example here is this is a little bit of a contrived example where we have the font size. 1 EM is by default. This depends on the browsers, 16 pixels. Style sheet, well, it depends on, by default it's 16 pixels, but you can set that to anything you want. In our case, we had set font size to 14 pixels. So that means This one, 14 pixels. So if anywhere else I say, for instance, I could change this to say 1 EM, that means 14 pixels. That means the exact same thing. If I wanted to make it double, then instead of having to multiply 14 times 2 and do like the math myself, I just do 2 EM. And if we look at our site, I think I just closed it. Navbar, let's try 1 EM. And it turns out I was lying. Let's take a look. So whenever you have these kind of problems, what you want to do is inspect and go to the computer tabs. The computer tab that lets you see everything more in detail. So what I want to check is the navbar. The navbar, I want to see the font size that is currently being applied to the navbar. Here I can just type font size 0 pixels. Body font size HTML. Okay, seems that then for some reason, let's try to do inherit and see if that works. The font size is not being inherited when it should be inherited. Inherit. Is this, let's take a look at the body has a font size of 14. Container has a font size of 0. Why does container here? We seem to be setting it ourselves. Oh.
You have container font size 0 in the CSS.
Why do we have that?
Line 13.
Font size, line 13, yes, here. That's so weird. Anyway, let's take a look at it in here. Font size, remove that. If we say 1 EM, nothing changes. If we want to scale it double, we do that. If we want to scale it 1.5, we can do that. Now there is EM and there is also REM. Let's take a look at here. One REM. The root, well, actually, in this case, they are both the same, just because the root EM means the font size of the HTML element, and we are setting that here. So for this case, it will be the same, but like if you're setting the font size of other inner elements, then EM will refer to the size of the parent element, and REM will refer to the size of the font size of the HTML element. The way in which this is cool, just before we take off, is that we can set the images to scale as we scale down our font size, basically. I think, but we already have a good scaling of the images here with that 70%. So I think that will be a contrived example for this. Let's see. Let's say we want to make this images a little bit smaller, right? And we want to also lower this font size. So what we can do is then set this here. When it's the smaller screen, let's lower the font size. So let's say font size. Let's lower it with respect to the original one. So let's say we want to scale it 1 by 1/7, for instance. Is this 700 pixels? Might be 700 pixels. Let's take a look here. Font size. Main font size. 0.8 EM. So that's 1/7 of that. It's kind of hard to see. Let's do 1/2. That's a little bit better. And let's say then these images, we can say the width of those images, which are inside of the sidebar. AMG. We want the width to be relative to the font size. Let's try 2 EM. And then those images will scale. Then 2 EM is too small. Let's try 10. And so on. And then in this fashion, then we can have our images basically scale with our font size. So that in smaller screens where, to fit all the content, your original font might be too big, you just scale that down. And if you need to scale anything else down with relative to your font size, then EMs are your friends basically to do that. That's pretty much it. Any final questions? Remember that if you have any of the standards that we outlined here at the top, that you need to move from developing or non-demonstrated, then go do that for the reassessment, any of these standards. Yeah, Douglas, I think you had a question.
It was just a quick one. What does EM stand for once more?
That's a good question that I don't have the answer for. I think it doesn't stand for anything, but let's Google it right now. Font size. I don't think let's see, maybe it stands for something. Meet the units. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything.
Thank you. Sorry to sidetrack.
That's okay. Other questions? Cool. Okay. Thank you, everyone. In the afternoon, you keep working on your capstone projects. Keep working on that proposal. If you haven't submitted, please submit your draft proposal by the end of today. If you already submitted, I'm going to be looking at them today and giving you feedback. I think some of you are meeting with me or with Dessa, so you should have received your calendar invites. That's it. If you have any questions, reach out. Remember to take the reassessment or also practice from there. Have a good lunch break, everyone.
Are we back at 2? We're back at 5:45.
We're back at 5:45. You're working on your capstone or meeting with me or
right. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you again for this. This helped out a lot.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alejo.
Yeah, you're all welcome. I'm going to put the link soon in YouTube, and well, I'll upload the video to YouTube and then share the link as usual in online resources or lesson streams. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.